Well, I'm going to continue with the study of Sermon on the Mount. And I just wanted to confess something. As I was first thinking about this series on the Sermon on the Mount, like the burden of giving a sermon on a sermon was, I was like, oh no, what can I say? Or is there like, it's just sermon, Sermon on the Mount. I should just read it. But I've repented because as I was studying in preparation for these messages, man, it's just the depth of it and the profundity of it and just how it connects to all these other parts of the Bible. It's just amazing. So, this winter retreat, I guess I have to start from here. This year's winter retreat, I taught a workshop on legalism, called Legalism, and what is legalism, what is Pharisaism, and things like that. And ever since then, I've been actually trying to study the Pharisees. I don't know if you've ever thought about that as a topic of study, but I wanted to study the Pharisees and the issue of legalism, and I've been learning a lot. And the passage that we'll be covering, the rest of chapter 5, or middle of it, it's a fascinating passage that helped me understand a lot more. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little portion of what we talked about in the winter retreat in Berkeley. But the word legalism, right? It's a label that gets thrown around a lot. It's a word that never appears in the Bible, though, but that's okay. It's just a bad label, You don't want to be legalistic if you're a Christian. Well, what people mean by that label, though, is whoever, like, if you try to ante up on moral standards or increase the standard or add to the law, that's a no-no. Okay, then that person is considered legalistic because the gospel is a gospel of grace, not law. Okay, but the passage that we'll be studying here, it's really difficult because Jesus seems to be doing that very thing. He seems to up the ante. He seems to be even adding to the law and increasing the standard. As he talks about adultery, divorce, as he talks about murder, So was Jesus being legalistic? Well, that's a pretty big problem for people who easily throw that label around. Sermon on the Mount is a huge problem, actually. For that reason, some people even go as far as to say, some people online, okay, not like real commentators, but those online, article writers, they even go as far as to say that Jesus was being legalistic on the Sermon on the Mount. They say he intentionally preached a legalistic non-Christian message so that we would lose hope, so that we can ultimately turn to the gospel. And so the Sermon on the Mount can be safely ignored by Christians. That's what they say. Come on. I read that because somebody forwarded to me, what do you think about this? I'm like, what in the world? Are you kidding me? Really? Really? So we can ignore sermon, like that's okay, like Jesus was just talking about nonsense. I think that just demonstrates how confused people have become about the topic of legalism, and now they're calling Jesus legalistic. Okay, I think as we study this passage, I think it really does clarify our perspective about how a Christian is supposed to interact with the laws of God or commandments of God or legalism, I guess, right? And it gives us insight into how we can sometimes mistreat God's commandments. So let's go ahead and read this. I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment." Oh, what's going on there? Okay. Did you hear that? No? All right, never mind. "But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Okay. So he says, don't murder, that's the law. But I say to you, first of all, just a little note here. Throughout this passage, you'll see this pattern. You have heard, but I say to you, So that's actually a pattern, and this is one of the striking ways that Jesus taught, which caused people to comment that Jesus taught with authority, not as the scribes. Pharisees and the scribes and the rabbis of that time, they always cited other previous rabbis and works. They never actually said, this is what they just said, this rabbi says this rabbi says this rabbi says that, I synthesize. That's like a good, like you do that on a good paper, That's a good thing. A paper with a lot of bibliography notes, like, that's good. What if your paper at the end just said, bibliography, me, You will not get a good grade on that. But Jesus actually did that. He says, I know you've heard it said, but I say to you. With that kind of, who does he think he is? He did not cite. He just authoritatively declared it. Is that good? Well, it depends on who you are. It depends on who you are, right? So, he's talking about murder. He says, you've heard the law about murder, okay? But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. You've committed murder in your hearts. Now, it's important to know that Jesus is not saying that getting angry at someone is exactly the same thing as committing murder. He just says, you'll be liable to judgment as well. Like, he's saying people who harbor hate internally, that's also wrong. That's like murder in that it's the same thread. You're liable to judgment. So you shouldn't go read this and say, well, you know what, I got angry at my roommate and told him that he's stupid, so might as well murder him. Because to God it's the same thing, it's the same thing. No, it's not. Don't murder your roommate. Okay? It's much worse to murder your roommate. Okay? And God knows that it's much worse. Okay? That's not what he's saying. So and also it's not saying that you somehow gotta be Zen, that like a Zen Buddhist, just feel nothing, desire nothing, get angry at nothing, right? It's not saying that you shouldn't feel any anger, including righteous indignation, because God gets angry. Jesus got angry, right, at sin and how people were treating worship at the temple and things like that. So what he's talking about is an internal attitude of anger toward a person, and then the whole thing about angry at his brother, insults his brother, you fool. Yeah, that whole rejection, right? It's an attitude that says, you know what, I really don't need this guy. I really don't need to interact with this fool. And you make that person non-existent in your mind. Like, I am going to disengage. I am going to actually pretend this person doesn't even exist. Actually, just kill him in my mind, in a way, right? And Jesus is saying that's wrong. You're liable to judgment. In fact, it's because it's that kind of attitude where murder starts. It becomes a seed for murder, right? So what was happening though here? So then why is Jesus kind of saying that you've heard it said, but I say to you? Well, you've heard it said. There seems to be some sort of a confrontation here. What's going on? And this is fascinating because what's been happening is that the Pharisees and the experts of the law, which throughout the Gospels, if you see them, if you study them, you'll see this pattern over and over again. They want to define things. They want to define murder. So they look at the command, you shall not murder, and they said, okay, define murder. It's a premeditated killing of another human being for personal reasons. That's murder. All right. That seems like a good definition. Well, the implication of that is if you're just angry internally, if you're only fantasizing murder, then that's fine, because there's nothing wrong with that. Where's the scriptural reference to condemn that? Because you didn't murder, because you didn't violate any laws. The problem with the Pharisees, it turns out, is not that they were too strict or too much. You'll see this again and again throughout this passage. The problem was that they were trying to define the letter of the law and saying, well, the law doesn't actually say anything about shutting someone out internally or anything like that. And since the law doesn't prohibit it, then I didn't do anything wrong. It's not a sin. That was their problem. They focused on the letter of the law rather than the heart of the law. So I'm going to give you a little fun exercise, so there's two brothers, okay? Two brothers. Just you guys have. I'm going to ask you to do a little role play. You choose one between the pair of you. Who's going to be the troll? Who's going to be the pair? Right? But the idea is, so the mom comes along The mom comes along and says, don't hit your brother. Okay? So that's the rule. Don't hit your brother. Got it? Now, after the mom goes away, the two brothers, the troll says, well, I can spit on my sister. Right? Because mom says, don't hit your brother, but I can spit on my sister. Okay? So I want you to pair up, and then let's say the pair says, I don't think you should. Like, I'm not sure. I don't think that would be disobeying mom or something. Let's say that's the case, okay? I'll give you 1 minute to role play. Now, I want you, if you're the troll, I want you to do your best job to convince the pair that it's okay to spit on your sister. But if you're the pair, do try to defend it. Try to defend your case, okay? And I want you to have an argument. Like, make it good. Make a good argument. All right? So let's go. 1 minute. Go. Wow, okay. Good. The argument is fierce. Looks like you're good at it. Okay. So, I just want to know. Okay, so trolls, did you make a good argument why you could spit on your sister? You feel like, yeah? Did you make the pair feel sufficiently bad? Yeah? Okay, if you didn't make the pair feel sufficiently bad, go ahead right now. Or pair, try to make I don't know, make the brother, make your troll feel sufficiently bad. 10 seconds. Just say something. Okay. All right, so I want to know though. Were there accusations of being legalistic? How many of you guys had past accusations of being legalistic? How many of you guys, which pairs, or pair as in P-A-R-I-R, did that? No, you guys, none of you actually, none of your trolls actually did you're being so legalistic, why are you, adding to the law kind of business? None of you did that? How many of you did? All right, some of you did that. Okay, good. Now, out of the people who did that, was it the troll saying that to the pair, or pair saying to the troll? Is that which way? Troll saying to the pair? Raise your hand. Okay, any pair say that to the troll? Nobody, right? Okay. So the accusation of legalism goes one way, from the troll to the pair. Right? Now, I want you to answer this question. Which one was being more lawyerly? Okay? Go ahead and answer this one. I want you to discuss what's the irony of the accusation of legalism. Okay, so I want you to talk about this for a minute and a half. Go. Yeah, so that's interesting, right? Clearly, the troll is being more lawyerly, legalistic, actually, and that seems to be the thing. If you actually study the Pharisees, that was what they were doing. Which one? Which one was more like like the Pharisees? Which one were they more like? The troll or the pair in their argumentation? It's exactly what the trolls were doing. You know, they were trolling, I guess, right? So, you know. Well, sometimes like it says, well, can I spit on my sister? Well, it doesn't say in the law that I can't. So it's okay. So that's okay. But if I punch my brother in the arm for fun, let's say I go, what's punch? Well, let's define punch. Punch is when a fist or hit is any kind of fist, foot, knee, or elbow, or head impacts any part of the other person's body. So then let's say I go, hey, bro, and then, boom, right? It's like, oh, that's a hit. Oh, you disobeyed the law. So that was like, no, that was disobedience to the law. But I can spit on a sister though. That's fine. It was that kind of a thing. So let's think about it. Were the Pharisees or legalists or like a person who would do that punch thing, are they more strict or more permissive? Well, it's both at the same time. It's weird, right? You can't do this, but then you can do other things, by defining it, by making it into a checklist, by saying where does it, by talking about or really focusing on the letter of the law. That's what you end up getting. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing. That's why they have all these laws about the Sabbath. They weren't trying to add to the law. What they were trying to do was they basically define what work is, because they saw the law was there. Do not work on the Sabbath. So you go, okay, what's work? Well, work. I mean, walking really far to somewhere carrying something. That's definitely work. So then where's the cutoff line? They said cutoff line is basically walking more than 2/3 of a mile. That's work. Harvesting. That's definitely work. Which, by the way, that when Jesus actually got some grains and he rubbed it between his fingers to eat the grains, he goes, that's harvesting. That's what they were saying, right? That's by definition, that's harvesting. Carrying something, yeah, that's work. So then, that's why they were really mad at Jesus for telling paralytic after he healed him, take up your mat and walk. And as he was carrying it, the Pharisees said, oh, that's work. Because that's definitionally, we defined it that way, and that's why they were upset at that, So yet, here's the irony: they were totally okay it was totally okay for a Jewish person to hire a bunch of Gentiles and have them work their fingers to the bone on the Sabbath. You see that? Because you didn't violate any laws. They're good lawyers, man. It's not forbidden. And Jesus is going, what in the world? He kept on trying to bring the Pharisees back to the heart of the Sabbath laws, which was to connect with God, which was a relational thing. That's what Jesus criticized the Pharisees for. He said that by establishing these traditions, he said, you reject the commandment of God. You have a fine way of following those things and then rejecting the core of the law, the commandment of God. That's why he said to them, you blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. So the problem wasn't that they were just too much or too strict. It's just they had somehow found a way to turn it into a situation where it's like you just by being precise, they found a way by being precise that created huge loopholes for themselves to be in the clear, so that they can be spiritually smug, so that they can go, yeah, we're good at this point. One commentator put it this way: by defining the prohibitions more precisely, they were able to increase the permissiveness of the law. So when the modern church-going person says, hey, as long as something is not explicitly forbidden in the Bible, I can do it. And if you tell me otherwise, then you're being legalistic. And when he says, well, what's wrong with blank. The Bible doesn't say it's sin, so don't tell me. That's okay for me to do. When they say such things, man, I think they often have no idea how ironic that is, how much of a Pharisee, how much they're being like the Pharisees. The modern irony is that people who are being most like the Pharisees accuse others who are trying to obey the heart of the law, trying our best to understand the heart of the law, heart of God, and trying to obey that. So when Jesus tells us on the Sermon on the Mount that you have heard it said, he says, you have heard it said, don't murder. Well, that includes, you have to understand, that includes don't hate your brother. That should be obvious, right? Because that's the heart of God. That's the heart of a father, heart of the mom example. Like, don't hate your brother. Don't hate your brother. That you should just know includes other things. It also includes when when the mom says don't hate your brother. It also includes don't verbally abuse your brother either. Don't verbally abuse your sister either. That's not adding to the law. That's understanding the heart of the law. Right? So let's do a little exercise because I think it's an important lens through which I think we can understand the commandments of God. So discuss this question. What is at the heart of mom's rule? Like, don't hit your brother. What's at the heart of it? And what I mean by that is, like, you can try to phrase it in a positive way rather than a prohibitive way or prohibition. You know what I mean? As a do blank instead of do not. Okay, go ahead and try to come up with it. All right, go. Okay. I hope that's easy. That was easy. So I'm gonna just ask you guys to just shout it out, all of you, and hopefully the answer will just kind of permeate the room. Right? Ready? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Love your brother. Treat your brothers and sisters with something. Something. Okay. Good. I think love was that's at the heart of the law. Or it could be a little bit more specific. Treat your brother with respect. So what Jesus is doing is actually not increasing the standard. Even though we, initially, when we read it, we feel like he's increasing the standard, right? It's because we're Pharisaic, because we're so much like the Pharisees by nature. I think it's just so easy to become a Pharisee when it comes to any commandments. He's not increasing the standard. He's actually bringing them back to the heart of the law. He's bringing them back to the heart of God in giving the law. So you have to understand the heart of God, and that becomes the key to understanding the rest of the chapter. Prohibitions are actually phrased in terms of what God does not want, but behind every prohibition, there is what God wants. And if you kind of turn it around like that, you start to understand the heart of God. Right? So that's why it would be totally wrong, like a totally wrong-headed thing for you to take this verse and say, oh, whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. Oh my gosh. But I didn't say you fool. I said dummy. So I don't think I ever said the word you. Like for you to engage in that kind of calculation, that would be like the troll, That would be like, where does it say? That would be being very legalistic, right? What's the heart of God giving the law about prohibition against murder? Put in a positive way in terms of what God wants, what would it be? Well, love would cover that, but more to the point, I think a little bit more precisely, if you ever got to that point of almost having a hateful thought towards your brother and having some tension, what would be the heart of God? Like the positive heart of God, you know what I mean? Instead of don't hate your brother, it would be something like reconcile. Reconcile your relationships. Live in harmony with one another. That's why in the very next passage, actually, Jesus talks about the scenario about reconciliation. It's actually the same passage. It's murder, reconciliation, because he's expressing the heart of God. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. He gives this scenario about reconciliation. But in this case, actually, it's the situation where your brother has something against you. So you've wronged the brother, and you're the one who did. So in that case, it says reconcile. Don't let the rift remain. Ask for forgiveness. Immediately, quickly, urgently. So it would be, again, Pharisaic for us to turn this into a specific rule again that only applies to like gift at the altar situation. Like gift leave your gift there as you're going to the altar. Okay, that means church. So if I'm going to do an offering at church, then I should make sure that I reconcile before I do an offering. But it's Tuesday, so I have time, No. I mean, if you did that, even if you actually did that, like, I should reconcile before every Sunday, that would still be good. That would be an improvement, I think. But still, that's not the point. The point is just reconcile as soon as possible. It's this whole thing about leaving your gift at the altar, there before the altar, at the most sacred, like right there at the altar, and go and reconcile. That just kind of expresses the urgency. Do it immediately. Do it quickly. Right? So as you're coming home from work, as you're coming home from class, and you remember that your brother has something against you, and you're like, yeah, I did something, or he's annoyed at me because I didn't do for the nth time, I didn't do this, or I didn't do that, even though I said I would, and reconcile quickly, We need to take seriously the need to reconcile quickly and urgently, because you know what, the tension can grow, and the wrongs can multiply quickly. You have to understand that you're kidding yourself if you feel like I'll just kind of let the tension stand. Tension can grow, and you can say, yeah, I did wrong, and that brother has something against me, that sister has something against me. But let's say you don't reconcile for whatever reason. Awkwardness maybe in the beginning. It's like, it's just okay. I don't have time right now. I don't know. And the time passes, and the awkwardness grows. Awkwardness grows again. It's been a week now, and now your awkwardness and the guilt that comes from it needs a place to rest. you need to blame it on something. That guilt can't roam forever. It has to land somewhere. So the other guy, your roommate now, is like, man, my roommate also is contributing to this tension. I mean, why doesn't why doesn't she take the initiative? Maybe, because she doesn't like me. That's why. Well, then I don't like him. I don't like her. I mean, that's a short distance from there to murderous thoughts and hateful thoughts, isn't it? Reconcile. So, when we're talking about the prohibition against murder, this is at the heart of the law. Urgently reconcile. Forgive quickly and ask for forgiveness quickly. Make things right. That's at the heart of the law. The prohibition against the sixth commandment, that was the prohibition against the sixth commandment. This is now Jesus moves on to the seventh commandment, which is adultery. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What's the pattern here? You see it now, right? What the Pharisees are doing. You look at the law. They looked at the law and says, well, you shall not commit adultery. Okay, what's adultery? Yeah, you can define that. So, what about going to lunch with my ex while my wife is away? Is that adultery? No, it's not. So it's okay, right? What if during lunch this happens? The fingertips touch. I said this to the Corinthian study people, but just touch like this. But not for long. 3 seconds. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. Boom. Okay? Boom. So, is that adultery? No. No, it's not. So I'm good, right? Like, then it's good. I'm in the clear. I didn't do anything wrong, right? Like, what is that? What is that? What's wrong with this? Huh? You legalistic people. Like, what's wrong with this, right? No. Jesus says, no, that's not good. That is not good. You have violated the heart of the law. Jesus is bringing us back to the heart of the law. You know, what does God want from us regarding this prohibition? What's at the heart of the law? To be faithful and to be sexually pure. You know, to look at a woman with lustful intent, that would be a violation of that moral law. You know, so for someone to say, wait, but in this law, it talks about adultery, and I'm not married, so even if I look at someone with lustful intent, I cannot possibly commit adultery, since by definition, adultery is only committed by married people, so I'm in the clear. That would be the wrong way to apply this or even think about it, you know. Sadly to say, that in high school, I remember reading this and getting all kind of scared and then thinking about it and justifying, like, yeah, I can't commit adultery, I'm not married. Right? So do you see how that would be like being like a Pharisee, right? So, verse 29 to 30 says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Man, he gets like scary on them, on us. You know, now, Jesus is obviously using hyperbole. He's not talking about self-mutilation. You know, he's not talking about actually gouging out the eye, but he's really using the typical rabbinic way of talking, you know, kind of hyperbolically. He's talking about the seriousness. He's really trying to instill in us the seriousness of sin. And in particular, actually, it's sexual sin, because this is sandwiched right in between two sexual sin, the adultery, and divorce about regarding sexual immorality. It's talking about it, I think it does apply to all sin, but particularly I think it's very applicable for sexual sin as well, you know. Another application here is not only to recognize the seriousness, but just the willingness to take some drastic actions. You know, not self-mutilation, but some drastic action. He seems to be saying that you should do that to cut off the source of sin. Now, at this point, people can say, well, the true source of sin is our hearts, our very selves. That's true. The true source of sin is our hearts. It comes from within. But this verse does clearly tell us there are some drastic actions that you can still take. You know, if in your struggle against lust, you know, let me get a little bit specific. Do you have a device that is an avenue for that sin to keep enslaving you over and over again? You kind of know. You pretty much know. Yeah, this situation with this device. Yeah, that's how it's going to go down. Not 100%, but that's how it goes down. You know. Well, what are some drastic actions you can take on that? You should put some. I don't know. You should put some monitoring software on it. And if that doesn't work, if you can't because for whatever reason, then you should get rid of it. Get rid of my device. That's like gouging out my right eye. I mean, my device is always right here, you know. I mean, is that being too much? You can make the case. Yeah, you can make the case. Yeah, the real source of sin is our hearts, so therefore it is useless to try to curb that desire through some external restraint. Yes, you can make that case. Well then, you know, if that's the case, though, it's kind of hard to understand Jesus' words here, right? Also, I would say, you know, if you're struggling with lust and you don't take any actions, if you say you struggle with lust but you don't take any of these actions or any kind of slightly drastic actions or try to really fight against sin by taking some action, then I can know one thing, which is that you are probably not that serious about struggling, or you're not in agreement with Jesus about the seriousness of sin. It's okay, it's all right. It's not, everybody does it or whatever, you know? Yeah. So we need to take this to heart. This sermon preaches. It's challenging. Divorce he continues the theme of sexual immorality and the sanctity of marriage. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Boy, this is tough for today's society. But then again, murderous thoughts, the sins that we've covered so far, that's like prevalent as well, We're sinners. But Old Testament gives provisions about divorce. Actually, it does. In Mark, Jesus confronts the Sadducees regarding divorce, and Jesus actually makes it clear God originally did not want divorce, but since your heart is so hard, God compromised. God gives, as a concession, He gave like a provision for divorce papers and things like that. Now, the Mosaic concession, the concession that was given in Deuteronomy was that divorces were allowed in case of quote-unquote indecency. And what that means, Jesus would say actually, is sexual immorality. But it just said indecency at that time. I mean, in that text. And it says, and if there's an indecency, then the divorce needed to be official, okay? Had to give a certificate of divorce. So there had to be a certificate of divorce that the husband gives the wife. I mean, this is actually kind of like only one way though, but and it served three purposes during that time, actually, because remember, this is not how God designed it, but this is a concession that God gives to protect humanity from ourselves, from the downward spiral that we can get into. Number one was that the divorce provision was to protect the sanctity of marriage from the indecency defiling the marital relationship. And second was to protect the wife from a husband who might simply send her away without any cause. There had to be a cause, sexual immorality cause kind of thing. And three, to document her status as a legitimately divorced woman, so she was not thought of as somebody who simply ran away or somebody, so that she couldn't get married again and things like that. So, oh no, that was the concession, but Jesus would actually say, no, you shouldn't do that, right? Unless it's actually adultery. So yeah, I guess even in adultery, in a case where she commits adultery, then I don't know what it means regarding whether or not she can marry again, but here I go again. I'm being Pharisaic again, trying to figure out what case studies there might be. But by the time of Jesus, actually, people were debating this Mosaic regulation, trying to define indecency. And so the liberal school of Hillel stated that this indecency clause for like a cause for divorce included, quote unquote, even if she spoiled a dish for him. So the Pharisees were saying that's indecent. So since that language, indecency, was very vague, man, we can work that. So the Pharisees, by taking the vague language of this allowance for divorce, they attempted to maximize that allowability, that flexibility, and made it extremely easy for men to divorce their wives, even for flippant and whimsical reasons. So it was extremely unfair for women. But they after doing that, they said, well, the scripture doesn't forbid that, though. We're still within the law because we gave the wife a certificate of divorce. As if God is really happy about that. Right? So Jesus brings them back to the heart of the law, to bring us back to the heart of the law, which is marriage is a covenant. Keep the covenant. Sexual immorality is the only legitimate reason for divorce. Well, why even that, though? Because marriage is defined by sexual fidelity. But we have to understand also that Jesus is not saying if there is unfaithfulness, then there must be divorce. He's not saying that either, right? So forgiveness and reconciliation is always an option. And he will teach us that in the next few verses, next set of verses, which we'll cover next week. Jesus brings us back to the heart of the law. The final one that I want to cover today is oaths. Again, you have heard that it was said that those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. I can, because I dyed it, but, just never mind. I know what he means. Okay, so let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. The pattern continues, right? Do you see the pattern? See, because there were Old Testament precepts about taking oaths in the name of God, but guess what the Pharisees did? They tried to define different objects. If you swore on God in the name of God, then that oath is binding. You can't break it. But if you weren't really serious, then you take oaths on different things, like heaven, earth, Jerusalem, my dog, you know? That oath was not considered binding. Or if you don't take any oaths, then you're really not serious about keeping your promise. So then, if they went back on their word, they say, well, it's permissible because I didn't take the level 3 oath. You know, I didn't invoke God, so it's not really binding. So I didn't break any law in the Old Testament, in the Bible. Jesus says, forget the oath. Forget it. You know, just be truthful. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Why find this loophole? That's the heart of God, right? Heart of the law. Just be a truthful person so that your words can be counted on. Anything more than this, anything to take an oath in order to take advantage of a loophole, to manipulate it, to deceive, that's from evil. You know, so as I close for today, we're going to be continuing this study that I'm really excited about, but let's listen to the heart of God. You know, as we live out our Christian lives, we do have moral exhortations given to us. How do you treat that? Can you, instead of being like a Pharisee and trying to define it so that you can find wiggle room, so that you can find loophole, or maybe it can also be like overly weirdly strict, like that's a punch, so I shouldn't do that kind of a thing. Can we listen to the heart of God? You know, there is a way to not be legalistic. Instead of always trying so hard to define the line and getting close, you find the line so that you can get as close as possible to it. Just love God. Let's love God. You know, one fascinating thing is that as I study the Pharisees, you know what the final conversation that Jesus has with the Pharisee is? Because Pharisees keep on escalating the issue, right? They escalate until he gets to Jerusalem. Escalate. And then there's a long conversation back and forth between the Pharisees and Jesus in Jerusalem. And there's one Pharisee, the final Pharisee, is actually impressed by Jesus. He's not trying to trap him. He's impressed. So he asks Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, what do you think? And the Pharisee says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the heart of the law. And Jesus says, you are not far from the kingdom of God. That's it. That's the heart of the law. And that's the final conversations that Pharisees have. And I think in a way, it's like, if we find ourselves Pharisaic like this, that's hopeful, that we understand the heart of God. That love, that's at the core of God's desire for us to love him and to be loved by him. Okay, let's pray. As the band comes up, I just want to ask you to think about what we talked about, the Pharisaic heart that seems so easy for us. Are you at a place where you don't, maybe you've gotten to a point where you just are not really interested in loving God, or you've treated God's laws, God's commands, God's exhortations as just a bunch of letters that you got to somehow navigate, feeling a little bit annoyed that God is exhorting us to not do this or do this. Can you hear the heart of God? Can you hear the heart of God? Can you say a prayer that says, Lord, I want to know your heart. I want to know your heart of love. Let me try to please you. Let me try to love you. Okay, so as you pray those words and pray those prayers, let's just have a time of reflection right now. Let's pray.